I started northbound from Springer in late March, the way too many first-timers do, swollen with optimism and ramen. The day I crossed Neal's Gap, March 28th, it felt like spring was finally tipping in our favor. Temperatures hovered in the high 50s. Sun softened the hard edges of the rock. The trees were still mostly gray and leafless, but there was a green fuzz at their tips, like ideas about to happen. I'd planned to push past the Blood Mountain shelter, but my left ankle had been barking since Woody Gap, so I called it early and set up there around 5:30 p.m. The shelter wasn't crowded, just me, a quiet section hiker named Dan, who said he'd worked as a school custodian in Cleveland, and a couple who camped down the slope in hammocks because the forecast called for light wind. We cooked in the golden hour, the ridge lit like it had been dusted with gold flour. I remember that because of the way steam rose off my pot and sparked in the light, and because of what came after, when the air turned flat and strange and the forest forgot to make noise, it started with the wind stopping like someone closed a door. The temperature bled down 10 degrees fast. I shrugged into my puffy and kept telling myself that mountains do this in the evening. But by 7:30, the sounds I'd unconsciously counted on the dull chop of distant traffic, the faint clatter of the couple's camp spoons, the constant conversation of birds went missing. The quiet felt thick. I heard my own breath and the tiny hiss of my headlamp on the brim of my cap. Even Dan finally said, "That's different." We made small talk to fill the gap. He told me he had a granddaughter who loved salamanders. I told him my mother hated the idea of me out here and made me promise to text whenever I found bars. Right about then, a single bar displayed like a mercy on my phone. I texted my mom a photo of the shelter, rough stone walls, a dark rectangle of doorway, rafter beams shadowing the ceiling. "Safe, see you in Maine," I joked. She heart-reacted. The message timestamp reads 7:52 p.m. At 8:17, I heard footfalls on the rock. Not the heavy stomp of an unsteady pack, not the careful dance of a trail runner. A light, steady walk. Someone came up the blue-blazed side path without using a headlamp. "Evening," I called out, and my voice sounded too loud. Dan angled his light toward the doorway. "You good?" he said to the rectangle of night. The footsteps stopped just outside. There's a particular smell to the trail wet wool, cedar, stale food. This was different, cold, like the air after you open a freezer and hold your face in the fog. Whoever stood there never answered. After a few seconds, the steps resumed, circling the shelter. Gravel popped. A twig snapped. The couple's headlamps winked down the slope, casting starry pinpricks through the trees as they turned toward the sound. "Probably a deer," I said, but my mouth was dry. Dan didn't answer. He had his head angled like he was trying to catch a word in static. We decided to hang our food early at the steel cables near the shelter, because doing something normal felt like insurance. I clipped my rock bag to the line and tossed. The throw arced cleanly in the beam of my headlamp. Somewhere farther into the trees something moved, the brush parting with a patience that made me think of a person using their hands instead of an animal pushing through. The couple abandoned their stove and climbed up toward us. "You hear that?" the woman asked, voice thin. "Yeah," I said, and we all stood listening to nothing, and the nothing had shape. Dan, who had been quiet, said, almost conversationally, "I stayed here once before." He didn't elaborate. He walked to the edge of the darkness, and I remember the way his light painted a patch of dry leaves and a half-rotted log and then stopped, like the night swallowed it. "Hello?" he said. From the dark, one step. That was enough. We retreated to the shelter, sat with our backs against stone, and kept our headlamps low. The couple radio whispered to each other in those practical tones people use when they're trying not to spook anyone. I tried to read my map. I stared at the contour lines until they were just gray spaghetti dot. At 9:32, my phone buzzed. A message came through with no sender, just the system gray box. Don't look. I blinked. I showed it to Dan. He frowned, scrolled, and handed the phone back like he didn't want to hold it. Glitch, he said. Glitches happen all the time. 20 minutes later, we heard the couple's tarp line creak, like a firm hand had grabbed the ridgeline and leaned. The man's light jerked on, slashed around. "Hey!" he shouted, with more anger than fear in it. "Hey!" The sound stopped immediately. Then, after a breath, something like a palm sliding down bark. The woman said, "Please don't," not loud. And I don't know if she was talking to him or to the night. We all made it to morning because that's what mornings do. They arrive whether you earn them or not. The gray came on at 6:07, birds switching back on one by one like a staggered row of light switches. The couple packed fast. "We're dropping to Neil's," the man said. "Zeroing in town." He tried to smile. It didn't reach his eyes. Dan and I walked out together. Frost filmed the leaves in places where cold had pooled. We descended in that spring sun that makes you forgive everything. Halfway down, I asked him what he'd meant when he said he'd stayed there before. He said, "It's the only shelter I've been to where I never saw anyone come in. But every time I woke up, there were more footprints." I laughed because the air was warm and because it felt safer to make a sound. "Hikers," I said. "Maybe," he said, and he stopped and pointed at the soft dirt beside the trail. There were prints overlapping prints, edges blurred, some shallow and some deep, like a small crowd had milled in place. None of them had tread. No lugs, no crosshatch. Bare, like someone had walked in soft shoes with no pattern, or bare feet, which would have been insane at that temperature. The size of them wasn't right either. Some too small, like a child's. One too long, like a stretched shadow dot. We kept moving because there wasn't anything else to do. At the parking lot, the couple's car was still there, dew beating on the windshield. I decided to hitch into town with them and zero as well. When I pulled out my phone to check a weather update, I noticed the unsent drafts I didn't remember writing. 3 of them. All the same message, time-stamped at 1:13 a.m., 2:41 a.m., and 3:08 a.m. Don't look. None of them addressed to anyone. No sender field. Just there waiting, I deleted them. The phone paused a second too long before accepting the delete, like something was considering whether to let go. Weeks later, in Virginia, a ridge runner told me a story about that shelter, how a man got turned around there in fog decades ago and died just off trail. So close he could have rolled down to safety if he'd known which way to fall. People swear they hear him circling, trying to line himself up with the doorway he can't find. I don't know if I believe in any of that. I only know the space outside the doorway felt occupied and that something had the manners to warn us, and that I obeyed. I didn't look. I still won't. Not when a doorway is just a black square and the air smells like the inside of a freezer. June 14th, Shenandoah National Park. A weekday soft enough that the trail felt like it belonged only to me and the deer. It had rained all morning, the kind that soaks your pack straps and makes your shirt cling to your spine but never breaks into a satisfying downpour. The fog was theatrical, draped low so the white blazes appeared one at a time like a magician's reveal. I'd planned to stealth camp between shelters because my guidebook promised a flat stretch near a spring. The sky kept threatening sun and not delivering it. Around noon, I ducked onto Skyline Drive to hitch down to a wayside for blackberry shake and fries. A park maintenance truck slowed, and the guy inside asked if I needed anything. I felt ridiculous asking if he had radio weather, like a World War II movie extra, but my battery was low and I'd kept my phone off to stretch it. He clicked his dash unit on and listened. The hiss and crackle sounded like ocean. Patchy dense fog overnight, a voice said from somewhere far. Visibility near zero on ridges. The driver looked at me and said, "You good?" "Yeah," I said. "Just fog. I camped by the spring anyway." The ground was kinder than usual, lamina of leaves laid thick. I strung my bear line and cooked couscous that tasted like nothing and everything. The fog slid between trees in long, slow breaths. It felt like being inside someone else's lungs. There was no wind, not even the small mercy of branches talking to one another. When sound did come, it came from very far a car down the drive, a raven stringing syllables together like a drunk professor. Somewhere near dusk, a shape appeared on the trail like it had been drawn with a fingertip on the fog. A person. Tall, narrow-shouldered, hands low, headlamp off. I had my camp at least 15 yards off the tread, but I still called out, "Hey there." The head turned, not fast enough for startle, not slow enough for casual. "You good?" I tried. The person's headlamp flicked on and off once. A reply, maybe. Then they continued walking, steps oddly measured. I watched their shadow pass through another patch of fog and couldn't shake the feeling the fog bent around them with more intention than wind had any right to dot at midnight. The world was down to my tent interior, and the sound of condensation gathering and letting go, soft drip drum beats along my fly. I woke to a radio. I don't carry a radio. But the sound was that exact texture. Thin voice, distant room, an urgent politeness. I dug for my phone, thinking I'd fallen asleep to a downloaded podcast, but the screen was black. The voice sounded like it was coming from the trail. Eastbound. Repeat, eastbound. Do not at mile marker. It blurred out. I lay very still, aware of the way my heart made sound in my own head. How small fabric can feel between you and a place that doesn't care. I tried to tell myself it was CB bleed from Skyline. Truckers or Rangers? I pressed my ear to the tent floor like a kid listening for thunder and heard a footstep in the leaves. Slow, careful, not sneaking. Exactly, but considerate, like the walker was trying not to wreck something fragile. "Hello?" I said, and my voice had that too bright edge fear gives it. The step stopped. 10 seconds. 20. 30. The radio voice, closer now. Do not proceed eastbound at mile marker. Static. A short burst of it, angry as bees. Then a whisper, not through radio, through air. Like someone enunciating with their mouth very close to the mesh. "You're not eastbound." I had the ridiculous urge to respond like the distinction mattered. "No," I said, because I was northbound. It felt simultaneously stupid and polite, like telling a wrong number caller they had the area code wrong. The step resumed. Past my tent. Up the trail. I lay there and counted between drops. At 50, the voice came again, exactly the same cadence as the first, but softer, like it was farther away or embarrassed to have to repeat itself. "Do not proceed eastbound at mile marker." The last words were gone completely, swallowed at dawn. The fog lifted enough to make outlines. My guy line shone with beads like strings of tiny glass. I unzipped and stood, stretching the kind of stretch you learn on trail that cracks half your back and makes you feel invented. On the tread, 2 boot prints faced north. Between them, like an afterthought, a long indent with no edges more like a drag than a step. I squatted and touched it. Wet dirt came away on my fingertip the way river silt does. Not boot then. Not shoe. Something that didn't distribute weight the way a body does near where the print stopped. Screwed to a tree at eye level was a brown aluminum mile marker. I hadn't noticed it last night. I stepped to it, grateful for something human and numbered, something park sanctioned. But the stencil was wrong. Instead of the usual neat white AT and mileage, the plate had 3 punched letters, ebb, and under it, scraped into the paint, A line like someone had started to write and forgotten how. I told myself I had misread in the low light. Later, at the next shelter, I looked up mile marker photos on another hiker's phone. They were all the same style I'd seen for days. White letters, brown background, no handmade graffiti. I didn't tell them why I was checking. I already felt too much like a child reporting a dream. 2 days later, I hit an overlook with 3 bars and called my sister because she worries in a way that lets me talk about myself. She works dispatch in a county across the country and sometimes tells me snippets. The way a voice can sound like a place. How repetition is both comfort and warning. When I mentioned the radio voice, she went quiet. Then she said, lightly, "That thing where people on trails hear old warnings? It's a known thing. Audio hangs in weird conditions. Topography plays with signals." "Yeah," I said. That's it. I didn't tell her about the whisper that knew my direction. I didn't tell her I'd found the same too long indent again near another mile marker, and that this time, kneeling, I'd realized the dirt wasn't depressed as much as smoothed, like someone had put their whole hand down, palm forward, and pulled. Not crawling, reaching. Weeks later, I was in Pennsylvania and a thunderstorm forced a bunch of us into a shelter like refugees. Someone told a story about Shenandoah, the way people do. A ranger who'd been hit on a fog-thick night and crawled trying to keep to the shoulder, the way training told him to, calling his own warnings into a radio that had lost its antenna in the hit. Urban legend, someone said. Totally not true, someone else said. The punchline suggestion is always the same, that sometimes the warning outlasts the warned. I don't know about that. I only know the voice wasn't for me. It kept saying eastbound because that was the line it knew, and that was a mistake it had to route around. The politeness of it, "Do not proceed," felt like the kind of thing you engrave into protocol so your voice keeps its human shape even when you've lost yours. I also know that when fog pulls low and the blazes arrive one white rectangle at a time, I don't move until the world reappears as one thing, not a stack of rooms that may or may not connect. And when I pass a mile marker, I keep my eyes on my feet, because once, for a moment, those punched letters were a question. "Eb, are you?" And I didn't want to have to answer. I went through the whites in a string of blue jeans weather days, lucky beyond reason. September 9th, 10th, 11th. The kind of sky that makes the word cobalt feel underpaid. Even the climbs felt merciful because the air tasted clean and the rocks were dry. I planned my days around the AMC huts, so I could buy soup and sit at a real table and feel like a person whose salt was on purpose. Zealand Falls. Hut closes for the season in mid-September, but they keep a winter room open, just a tiny space with bunks and a door you can shut between you and the wind. I got there early, long before sunset, because a friend had warned me the approach can turn into a slip and slide if it's wet. It wasn't wet. It was perfect. The falls themselves were shouldered in white noise. I sat on the porch steps and drank the last of my instant coffee like it was a treat reserved for people with excellent judgment. Other hikers drifted in, then drifted on. A pair of day hikers from Boston told me about a moose on Zealand Road last year. A father and daughter asked to peek into the winter room. The girl sniffed and said it smelled like crayons. By dusk, I was alone. There's a particular smallness to being inside a structure that's inside a bigger structure that's made of weather. The winter room door closed with a firm click, the kind you feel in your palm. The bunks were simple plywood with the kind of varnish you only notice because it catches your headlamp in a honey sheen. I boiled water, ate. Read a paperback in the lazy way you read when you don't have enough light to read well and you're pretending you do. At 9:41 p.m., wind found the hut. Not hard, curious. It tested the eaves like a hand along a seam. I could feel a pressure on my eardrums the way you do in elevators. The falls outside were a constant, which should have been comforting. Instead, that steadiness made every other sound feel like a decision. I heard footsteps on the porch. Rubber on wood. A pause. Then the knob of the winter room door turned once, as if someone were checking it. I froze in my quilt and told myself through gritted teeth that late hikers exist, that rangers exist, that I should say something like a person. "Hey there," I called. The knob froze mid-turn. The pause was long enough to imagine a face inches away on the other side of thin wood, long enough to picture the squint of trying to see through a panel. Then the knob turned back to neutral. Footsteps moved away, not down the steps, not toward the porch edge. Lateral, along the wall. The sound vanished where the wall should have met open air. I stayed awake for a stupid long time after that, listening for the sound of someone walking back across a porch that wasn't there on that side. I didn't hear it. Instead, I heard the falls change their pitch like a choir breathes between verses, and then I heard the sound of a hand sliding along rough wood. Not the door now. The outside wall. A small, ashamed part of me waited for the theatrical. A bang, a shout, a face at the window. What came was quieter and therefore worse. The slow rasp of dry skin across grain, moving toward the corner where the winter room ended and the main hut began. The rasp stopped there and a light touched the window, not a headlamp cone, not a phone glow. Something smooth, low, like the brightness of a watch face in a theater. It held for 3 seconds and went out. I counted. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3. Then nothing. I slept, because your body makes deals with your mind when it has to. In the morning, mist hung over the falls in a gorgeous cliché. The porch was there, exactly where it had been. I stepped onto it to prove something to myself, and my boot toe hit a dark scuff line at shin height on the wall, thin and straight. It ran along the boards for 6 feet, too high for a boot scrape, too low for a pack graze. I ran my finger along it and felt grit, splinters. It looked like something hard had been dragged slowly along. The wall at a consistent pressure. I rounded the corner, where the sound had disappeared the night before, and found air. No porch, no ledge. The drop wasn't sheer, but it was enough to make me step back. I turned, felt stupid for turning, and then felt stupider for feeling stupid. The scuff line stopped at the corner, then picked up again on the other face of the wall. Like a pencil mark, someone had carefully continued around the edge, down at Zealand Road. I stuck my thumb out and got a ride into Twin Mountain with an older guy in a Subaru who told me he'd done hut work as a kid. He laughed when I said the winter room had spooked me. Then he sobered and said, "Huh," and told me a story I wish he hadn't. Caretaker had once gotten locked out of the winter room after a late trip to the privy when the latch fell. He'd circled the hut, feeling along the wall because he didn't want to go down the steps and around in the dark. He knew the seam of the boards like a hand knows a pocket. He'd knocked lightly to wake a sleeping hiker and swore he saw a light come up to the window, then go out. In the morning, they found the scuff lines their boots had left where they shouldn't have been on the wall. He'd walked with his palms while hugging the boards. The caretaker insisted he'd circled once and stopped. The lines circled twice. "Maple," the Subaru guy said. "Takes marks nice and clean. I don't know if the story is real. People tell you things in the Whites because the drama of the place begs for it." But 2 weeks later, when I went to log my miles on the Far Out app, I noticed an offline note I didn't remember writing. It was pinned to Zealand Falls, time-stamped 9:47 p.m. "I'm here. Can you turn on the light?" I stared at it a long time before deleting it. My thumb shook in that ridiculous way that's more embarrassing than fear dots since then. Doors with solid latches don't make me feel safe the way they used to. They make me feel like I owe someone a courtesy knock, or the decency of leaving a light on when the falls are loud and the air is thin and a hand is searching for the seam it knew once, long enough ago that maybe the wood has moved. And I do leave one on, even in places with real walls and neighbors. A nightlight for someone whose route wraps an extra time around the corner, just to be sure, leaving dark scuffs where our explanations don't. I hit max patch on a Monday you'd call perfect if you didn't know better. June 24th. The sky rinsed clean by an afternoon storm, the kind of hyperblue that makes every blade of grass feel outlined. I'd started that morning near Lemon Gap, dry socks, good legs, and the light tailwind you always hope will keep the gnats off your neck. By 5 p.m. I was on the Bald with about a dozen other hikers, a scatter of tents going up like bright mushrooms. People passed stoves around, shared gummy bears, traded weather rumors. Clear tonight, a trail dad announced, tapping his phone. Windy, but clear. Max Patch is one of those places that makes you understand why the word pastoral stuck. The views fold forever. Fences lean in that photogenic way. I took all the photos you take, shoes in foreground, ridges stacked like paper, my dumb happy face at golden hour. I found a tent spot tucked by a low hummock to break the wind and stashed my pack inside. The breeze moved in steady strokes, the kind that combed the grass. 2 kids from Ohio were trying to light a stove that didn't want to be a stove. A couple in their 50s told me they were sectioning to hot springs and warned me about a wasp nest past Garenflo Gap, which I wrote down because trail kindness is religion out here. At sunset. The air went thin and cold fast, the way it does when the daylight drops like a curtain instead of fading. The ridges went from green to navy, then to ink. We did the small-town thing of calling the colors out loud as if we were the first to see them. Someone's Bluetooth speaker stayed mercifully dark. Headlamps blinked on one by one. A constellation with tent poles. Then the wind changed. Not stronger, just angled. It came low, as if it had learned a new route across the grass. We all looked up at the same moment without meaning to, like you do when a teacher enters a room. One of the Ohio kids said, "Whoa," in a voice much younger than his beard. Down dash slope, away from most of the tents, a tiny orange light unfurled, not a flare, not a headlamp flame. You're not supposed to have fires up there anymore. There are signs at the access point, and people who care have to say the same sentence 1,000 times every summer. Please don't. Whoever lit it had kept it tight in a shallow ring. And for a second I was relieved at least it wasn't some trash blaze. I almost called out, "Hey, no fires," but the wind carried the heat scent up to a sweet, like green wood and something else like old canvas singed. That smell made me keep my mouth shut. The trail dad stood and put his hands on his hips, ranger posture he'd probably learned from TV. "We should go tell them," he said, and started in that direction. He'd gone 20 feet when somebody's voice cut cleanly over the grass. "Quiet hours begin at 10. Group size verified?" We all froze and turned our lights toward where the voice came from. It wasn't the fire spot. It was behind us, up on the slight swell of the Bald, between 2 tents. That voice had that particular park official politeness, crisp edges on the words. You hear it in visitor centers. You hear it when someone wants you to know they're not angry. They're correct. "Who's that?" The Ohio kid said, whispering from his crouch like gravity had increased. "Quiet hours begin at 10, the voice repeated. "Group size verified?" The second time the cadence was identical, like an audio loop. My headlamp washed 2 tents and wet grass and nothing else. The beam caught breath fog for a second and then didn't. I thought it was mine until I saw my breath wasn't moving that way. Trail dad said, "Ranger?" To the dark, and whoever answered said, "Verify." But the word was wrong in the mouth. The F like a V and the V like a swallowed F. It was almost funny because a mispronounced official word is a kid in a costume. I waited for someone to laugh. No one did. We did the nervous choreographed shuffle of people who don't want to be singled out by a light. The couple from Hot Springs moved closer together. Somewhere a zipper stuttered. The fire downslope licked higher, then dropped obediently low, like a dog going back to heel. The wind stopped long enough for me to hear the grass rub its hands. "Look," one of the Ohio kids whispered. He pointed at the fire spot, and all the heads turned, which is probably why what moved between our tents didn't feel seen. I only caught it in the corner of my eye, a headlamp-level brightness, round as a coin, sliding at waist height, not bobbing the way a walking light does, but gliding like a careful scan. It paused at my tent door. I felt the heat of being looked at through fabric, which is stupid because light doesn't have temperature. I held my breath without meaning to. "Is your permit visible?" The voice asked from approximately 3 feet away. "I don't have permits on the AT because you don't need them there. Not the way you do in backcountry out west." I could make a whole argument about jurisdiction and guidelines, but my brain was ajar with marbles in it. My mouth said, "Yes," because that's a word that sounds like it will end a conversation. The light moved on. I let my breath out in a slow leak that squeaked at the end. I hated that noise for hours afterward. Downslope, the fire guttered and steadied like a heartbeat. "We should put that out," the trail dad said again, softer. No one moved. At 9:54, the wind came back, brisk. Tents shouldered it, lines sang. I lay on my back and watched my ceiling breathe, triangles of nylon deepening and relaxing. The voice did one more loop. "Quiet hours begin at 10. Group size verified." Then a new line, flat as a page. "Day use only." It felt like being scolded by a sign. I must have drifted, because the next thing I remember is waking to what I thought was rain hitting the fly. It wasn't rain. It was the sound of tent stakes lifting and laying back down, a tiny metallic complaint. Not mine, someone's, then another. A third. The sequence moved across the bald in a too-even rhythm, not careful enough to be a person double-checking guidelines, not chaotic enough to be wind mischief. Lift, lay, lift, lay. Like a hand testing a seam. A woman yelped in that half-sleep voice, and a light snapped on, and the rhythm stopped hard. I swallowed and tasted metal the way you do after holding a penny on your tongue as a dare. When silence returned, it felt conditional, like something had agreed not to do something as long as we didn't either. At 10:07, the voice came very close to my door. I didn't see the light this time. I smelled damp canvas and that weird singed note again, like a wet tarp held too near a flame. 4 after 10, it said, not scolding, just noting. My hand went to my zipper and stayed there because the thought of having a conversation at face height through mesh made my whole body lock. The voice didn't ask anything. It moved on. If it was wind carrying it, the wind was drawing a map with a compass. When dawn smudged in, none of us were asleep. You could tell by the way everyone opened their tent at once, pretending they just happened to wake then. The grass lay combed in rows that made sense if you realized the wind had spent the night in a pattern. Trail Dad stood, bleary, and pointed down slope. The fire pit was a circle of ash you could mistake for frost if you'd never seen burned grass. No footprints disturbed the wet around it, just the big dark halo where heat had pressed its argument. We walked down together without planning to. The ring looked old and new at once, stones clean on their outward faces, black on the inward. Someone had set a metal tent stake upright in the center like a sundial. It was too hot to touch. None of us had seen anyone down here all night. "This is stupid," the Ohio kid said, rhetorical fury. "This is nothing." He threw a cup of water from his bottle onto the stake. It hissed like a cat and steamed, and I swear, sounded offended. I thought of leaving right then, rolling my wet tent like a bad decision and putting miles between me and any place with rules. Instead, I did what you do when you don't know the right ritual. Normal tasks with reverence. I brushed my teeth. I packed slowly. I folded my headlamp strap as if neatness mattered to it. Back in Hot Springs, In the lazy cool of a library with plugs, I went through the photos on my phone to post too. Pretend that square images could explain being up there. In the third photo, the one I'd taken at full dark, panning too fast so that tent light streaked I saw something that made me slide the phone face down on the table like it had spoken out of turn. It was a tent I didn't remember. A low, old-fashioned A-frame shape with guy lines that didn't sag in the wind the way ours did. Its canvas was the color of a bandage. No brand badge. No flashy vestibule. In the photo, it glowed from within, a soft, non-electric light. I scrolled back to the earlier daylight shots. No such tent. I scrolled forward to the blue hour photos. Nothing. Only in the one where the wind had made me move did it show I told myself exposure and artifact and the way LED lights smear. I posted a picture of grass and sky and captioned it with a joke about ramen. That night in the hostel bunk, I woke to a voice outside the door of our room. Polite as a brochure, not loud enough to wake anyone else. Quiet hours begin at 10, it said. Group size verified? I walked to the door and looked through the peephole and saw nothing but the long, empty hall. The voice did not repeat itself. In the morning there was a triangle of ash on the concrete back patio, 3 stones arranged carefully like someone had been taught their order a long time ago. Max Patch is still beautiful. People will tell you it's crowded and Instagrammed to death, and they're right. It's also a place that believes in rules in a way that feels older than the signs. I don't build fires. I keep my voice low at 10 because I don't want to be counted. When the wind drops in the grass. I rolled into Harpers Ferry on August 3rd, feet sore, morale shaky, the kind of mood where history feels heavier than usual. The town has that layered quality tourists licking ice cream on the street where John Brown once bled. Rangers in flat hats moving like patient actors, train horns cracking the air wide open. I crossed the footbridge late after the sun had ducked behind Maryland Heights, and the water below caught just enough light to look like a muscle flexing. I'd booked a bunk at a hostel but stopped first to sit on the steps near the outfitter, chewing trail mix gone stale in the humidity. A local guy with paint-flecked jeans and a ball cap asked if I'd made it through the gap yet. I thought he meant the bridge. He didn't. Not that gap, he said. The night gap. You'll know if you hear him. He grinned too wide and walked on, leaving me unsure if I'd been warned or teased. That night the hostel was full-section hikers, flip-floppers, even a pair of thru-hikers who had started late February. We traded the usual jokes about mileage lies and ramen fatigue. By 11, most lights were out. I couldn't sleep, though. My window cracked onto the street, and the sounds came in like ghosts of the past. Train wheels screaming, laughter too far away to make sense, the hollow clack of shoes on brick. I rolled over, then over again, then gave up and dressed to walk it off. The town was different at night. Not just quieter, emptier in a way that didn't feel earned. Storefront glass reflected nothing. Street lamps hummed but didn't chase shadows all the way into corners. On High Street, the air felt pressed down like a storm without rain. And then I saw it, a glow moving toward the train bridge. Not a flashlight. Not the white cone of a headlamp. This was softer, yellowed, pulsing like breath. A lantern. The figure holding it walked steady, the flame never faltering despite the draft coming off the water. I thought maybe it was a reenactor. Harper's Ferry thrives on costumes, but no show should have been running after midnight. I followed, because curiosity makes fools of us all. The man's hat brim was low, shoulders narrow, coat long. He didn't look around. The lantern swayed gently, perfectly rhythmic. When he reached the bridge, he stopped at the center span, raised the lantern shoulder high, and held it out over the black Potomac. For a moment the water showed itself greenish skin with bone-white streaks, and then the lantern lowered. I stepped closer, my boots ringing on the iron. "Hey, I called, stupidly casual. "You good out here?" He didn't turn. The lantern tilted once, twice, 3 times. A pattern, deliberate as Morse. Then he walked on, straight into the fog that had thickened across the last section of the bridge. I followed far enough to realize the sound of boots wasn't doubling, it was still single. Mine echoed, his did not. The fog should have cleared near the end, but it didn't. It deepened until my headlamp halo was no more than a smudge on cotton. The lantern glow disappeared, as if swallowed. I stopped. My body made the decision without me. Something in the fog smelled like iron filings, sharp and metallic. A voice came through, low and flat, almost kind. "Keep to the center." I staggered back 1 step. "What?" "Keep to the center," it repeated. Same tone, same pause between words, as though it were a recording. I bolted boots slapping the bridge, hands cold on the railing, lungs tearing. I didn't stop until the hostel door locked behind me. In the morning, everything was brightness and normalcy. The hikers laughed over coffee, and I tried to forget. But when I scrolled my phone for the weather, I found a photo I didn't take. Timestamp 12:47 a.m., angle wrong for my hand. It showed the bridge, fog thick, and a lantern glow in the exact middle. No figure, just the light, hanging there like a question. Later, a ranger at the visitor center overheard me asking about night walks. He said quietly, "Sometimes people see him. They call him the Lantern Man. Story goes he was a watchman on the B&O line. Tried to warn of a flood one night, waving his lantern to stop the train. The water took him. Folks say he still walks the bridge, counting cars that don't come anymore." I laughed thin, said thanks, pretended it was campfire folklore. But I don't walk bridges at night anymore. And when fog comes down sudden, I stay still because I can still hear it in the back of my skull. That polite, unbending phrase, giving rules no one asked for. Keep to the center.